All right, let's talk about reading water and how that works off of rocks, which is in my location of Cape Ann, kind of the hardest thing to do and the hardest thing to read where current lines are, where those bass are going to be setting up, and what direction the current is moving in. One thing that I want to tell a story about this is how this worked in my favor and how all of a sudden a bite had flipped on because of the current. And when that water changed directions, the bait all of a sudden just appeared, the bass appeared, and we started catching fish. So I was fishing at this one spot, and it was actually bluefish that appeared, not bass, but it's the same. It's generally, this was this year. I have other examples for times that bass appeared, but for example, this was just at the beginning of the fall run. We hadn't had peanut bunker show up yet on Cape Ann, and it was late for those peanut bunker to have not showed up. And I was fishing one day, and I knew that generally this tide fished a little bit better on the outgoing tide, and I wasn't 100% sure at this time what direction the current would be going. But it was interesting because I was standing up on that wall and I was looking down and I was fishing for bluefish. So I was fishing a big pencil popper, trying to work it really fast and loud to attract the bluefish. And all of a sudden, I knew the tide turned at, like, let's say 12 o'clock. So the tide turned, and as soon as the tide turned, I started to see massive pods of peanut bunker going with the direction of the tide. And I wasn't 100% sure if that was the direction that the tide moved in, but then I paid attention to everything that was in the water, from the seaweed to obviously the bait, and it was all moving from left to right. And I then later on asked somebody that's been fishing on Cape Ann for years, I was like, in that spot, does the tide move from left to right on an outgoing tide? And he said, yes it does. So I was like, okay, I'm not crazy here. That like showed me here that because all of a sudden the tide turned and the bait started to move from left to right, everything just started to happen. All of a sudden there was baby, this very small bonito that just appeared, and the bluefish appeared, and we had a crazy bluefish blitz for about 25 minutes, and the thing just shut off, which is kind of normal for bluefish. But the other thing that I fished, another story, was around the same time, we didn't have a ton of bass. And so one of the first days that the big bass appeared and really started to show up, I was fishing off of this rock point, and there's a current seam where there was clearly ripply water, and then there was a point where I'm sitting at, and the current was coming across this part of the rock and hitting the current that was coming out here, and it was where everything met, boom, and it would shoot out straight. So you could see there was a ripply point, and all of a sudden it was smooth on one side. And I was fishing that current seam, and the bass would be hanging out on that current seam feeding. So I casted just up current, and I let my pencil popper drift just across the current seam. And as soon as that drifted across the current seam, boom, I got hit by a really big bass. I didn't end up hooking the fish, but it was it was one of the first times I'd fished that spot as well. And it was one of those things that I learned immediately that, like, these fish count and rely on this current seam to feed in this spot. And it's one of those things, like, I was fishing around, there's a few different boulders and stuff that look good, but the fact that I could see that there was ripply water and then a flat current seam against that was huge when it came to catching the fish. And so a lot of the time when the wind's blowing offshore pretty hard, it'll actually blow everything flat, and there'll be a color difference in the water, and you'll be able to see off of lots of the points there's going to be something that looks like a line, and that's going to be the current line. So the current's going to be either moving to the left or the right of that, and you'll have to figure that out based on what direction the seaweed's kind of flowing mostly, or if you cast out in extreme cases, which direction your plug will float. You can sometimes see it if there's boulders sticking out of the water, which side of it you can see the water kind of eddy behind when it's swirling behind the water. But the most important part, I would say, is to look for those current seams and cast along those current seams, because a lot of the time those bass will be just cruising in there because they know that the bait will get trapped in that current and follow those current seams kind of like a highway. And that's when the bass will stage up and feed on the bait fish that are in that area. So that's a huge important way that I always find where a lot of the time the bass will be sitting in a spot. If you guys enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.